Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 21st day of November in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking today about the economy in general, as well as the United States economy specifically. You probably remember when Democrat policy advisor James Carville told then candidate Bill Clinton, quote, "It's the economy, stupid," end quote. Well, he was correct. He was right. He's still right today. Remember, folks, that next week is Thanksgiving, so there will be no Castle Report. I'll join you again, God willing, on Friday, December the 5th. Yes, Carville was a very effective political operative in those days, was apparently able to convince Mr. Clinton that the people who would elect him or his opponent cared more about their standard of living than they did about any foreign policy issue. They should have cared more about donating their children to the foreign policy whims of whoever was in office. But when push comes to shove, everyone has to eat. A family of four, those relationships used to exist, is acutely aware of what food and gasoline cost. I'm a layperson in economics, folks, in the sense that I'm not trained in economics, but I do have a family with the same economic needs as everyone else. Most importantly, I have been a bankruptcy attorney for 46 years, which has kept me in the forefront of the economic needs of ordinary people. Tens of thousands of people and businesses have told me about their struggles. They told me this in cities all over the country. I have helped them find a way through the economic troubles. With all that said, let's look at some of the economic facts that trouble the country and its people right now. When I say, as I do from time to time, that an economic catastrophe is coming, with the only question being, when will it arrive? Why do I believe that? Not much makes any sense these days, since America is the hottest economy in the world, attracting trillions of dollars in capital, we're told. But inflation is still present, and it seems that almost weekly another major corporation announces layoffs or store closings. Last week, the fast food chain Wendy's announced it would close 400 restaurants. Amazon announced it would be replacing about 30,000 employees with robots. The economy depends on federal money, federal spending. That is now completely out of control. My fear is that so many irreversible commitments have been made that the federal government is not capable of living within its means, and if true, that would signal eventual disaster. Fiscal year 2025, which just ended on September 30th of this year, posted a deficit of $1.8 trillion. Deficit means that the government spent $1.8 trillion more than it received in revenue. It's simple if you think about it from the standpoint of your own family. Suppose you make $75,000 per year, but you spend $100,000. You do that year after year. You know what's going to happen, folks. What's going to happen is that eventually you're going to be in my office or someone like me to consult about bankruptcy. You can keep the plates in the air for a while by borrowing, getting payday loans and the like, by using one credit card to pay another credit card until there's no more credit limit left on any cards. You can last for a while doing that by just making interest payments on the cards, but then you can't even do that. The problem gets worse and worse until it becomes unfixable and bankruptcy results. That is exactly what the federal government is doing to manage its spending. One of the major warning signs of impending trouble that economists always warn us about is that when interest becomes the biggest item in the budget, it doesn't exceed medical expenses or Social Security yet. But this year, ominously, interest was higher than the massive defense budget, just as you do with your credit cards. The government has to borrow just to pay the interest on its loans. In other words, the government is paying debt by incurring more debt, which drives the debt and next year's payments even higher. This all means that annual interest, which now exceeds 20% of all tax revenue, will continue to increase. The debt is purchased primarily by foreign governments, foreign central banks, large corporations, commercial banks, sometimes individual investors. Recently, in an ominous trend, those foreigners have been net sellers of U.S. debt. That means that the financing of the debt falls to domestic investors, meaning you and me, people individually through retirement accounts or through purchase of some investment fund, finance government debt with their savings. It's necessary that individual Americans do well because they have to save to invest in U.S. debt. Unfortunately, this year, net savings is on track to be less than $1 trillion, the lowest figure in many years, while the deficit is on track to be roughly $2 trillion. This all means there are not enough foreign buyers, not enough domestic savers to finance the debt. So the only option is for the banking system, i.e. the Federal Reserve System, to create the money to pay for the excessive spending. I say excessive because if you spend more than you make with no plan to pay it, I call that excessive. When you get yourself into that cycle, you have to stop to reverse course before it's too late. It's almost like alcoholism or some other addiction. You can stop for a while, but then it's too late. You can't stop on your own. Inflation is the result when money is created and pumped into the economy without any corresponding increase in production. Energy. It's estimated energy is about 50% of the cost of producing everything. When you make energy decisions on a national level that cut back available energy and add to the cost, everything increases in price across the economy. When politicians of one party or another decide to put on their virtue signaling show by refusing to allow any domestic production, it costs everyone, everything. Families use food, fuel, automobiles, clothes. Everything for individuals costs more. The products necessary for business, from new machinery to microchips, increase as well. There is no corresponding increase in wages for people, so their standard of living is diminished. If a person usually pays $2.75 per gallon for gas, uses 20 gallons a week, that's $55 a week. So if it goes to $3, he just took a $5 reduction in his standard of living. People see this happening and they circle the wagons by cutting back on spending. When people reduce spending, huge corporations such as Walmart and Amazon cut back as well, which means jobs are lost. The process gets worse and worse. Layoffs are becoming common. Technology such as AI, along with robotics, makes reducing the workforce easier to do. As I said earlier, Amazon has announced plans to replace 30,000 workers with robots. Those machines never have sick days. They take no vacations. They do not get pregnant. They don't worry about retirement. Bad policies from the federal government, and most policies are bad, make our lives more complicated, more expensive. For example, Obamacare was called the Affordable Care Act, but it has made the cost of health care much higher. The cost of insurance is skyrocketing. There are several indicators that can be followed to track the status of the economy. One of those, first and most obvious, is shipping records, or the giant container ships out on the ocean that you see pictures of, you view on television. They represent the health of the population. When that number falls economically, it means something bad. Timber is another indicator. Prices are lower this year for timber. That's good for consumers because it means things made from timber are also lower in price, but it bodes ill for the overall health of the economy. Lower demand for timber means lower demand for new houses. Builders aren't building. That means the housing market is slow. Not many are looking to build a new home these days. They can't afford it. Instead, people who have low interest rate mortgages are sitting tight, which means fewer homes on the market and higher prices for those new ones. The young suffer because they don't have a lower interest rate loan, and houses are rising, so they can't afford to move out of their apartment to have a family. Most people who start a family want a place for them to live, a yard for the kids to play in. I know I did when my daughter was born. High income prices mean that for the first time in U.S. history, the average age of first-time home buyers is above 40. The president sees all this as well as I do. He's very conscious of the fact that his tariffs have added to the cost of everything, whether he admits that or not. A tariff is a charge. Whether we call it a tax or not, it is a fee we charge foreigners for the privilege of having access to the American market. The result, when it ripples through the economy, is more money burning a hole in the government's pocket, higher prices for individuals. The president sees that. He hears the crying, so he comes up with a plan to send $2,000 to each American below a certain income level. I'm opposed to it for many reasons, but the primary one is that it will fuel more inflation, make everything cost more, be self-defeating in the long run. Who wouldn't want an extra $2,000 he hasn't earned, but in the long run, it will not help my local newspaper, which is owned by USA Today Group, and therefore is an almost exact copy of the New York Times, except for the sports coverage is not as good. My local paper said in an article recently, last Wednesday I think it was, that the cost of this tariff rebate could be, quote, could be $600 million, end quote. Well, the tariffs have brought in only 300, they point out. So it could be 600 to cost, 300 brought in. So the cost could be this or that, but I assume everything in the article is slanted and a lie, so you can't depend on it for information. Instead, the paper should say, look, folks, look, this country is $38 trillion in debt and on track to spend $2 trillion more than it takes in. So to have some chance to avoid a future catastrophe, use the money to at least reduce the deficit some. Finally, folks, is there any way to restore the system and avoid what I have called a looming catastrophe? Sure there is. Just see the results Javier Milei has achieved in Argentina in only 2 years. Cut spending. Stop only tying excessive spending to fraud. Just say we can't afford it anymore. Close overseas bases. Stop fighting other people's wars. Come home. Mind your own business. Wasteful programs, and that's almost all of them, will have to go. So that is the obvious formula. But will we attempt it? No. No, folks, I'm certain we will not. At least that's the way I see it until December 5th, folks. This is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.